I call stress the big hairy monster toxin. Stress can change how your body detoxifies. It can change the physiologic effects. I mean, just an acute bout of stress can lead to leaky gut.
We have Dr. Deanna Minich, PhD, MS, CNS, IFMCP. She is a nutrition scientist and functional medicine educator. She is internationally recognized for her pioneering work on color-coded nutrition, or the rainbow diet, detoxification, circadian biology, and women's hormones.
Fiber's been around forever. It's nothing new, but we're still eating too little in the way of fiber.
What are most Americans consuming, do you know?
11 to 15 grams per day.
And what do you recommend?
Double that. If we ate more fiber, we'd be less hungry, we'd have better blood sugar, we'd have better insulin, we'd have better cortisol, we'd have better hormones. It's kind of like, we can track everything back to fiber in some way, which is why it's so important, in my belief, to eat plants.
Going back to looking at the gut and looking at the potential leaky gut or changes in the microbiome, what are a few things that if those were start to be observed, you could do about it?
So one is looking at prebiotic fibers. The second thing is the probiotics. So what you're doing with your kimchi and fermented foods is great because you're getting those diverse microorganisms. And then the third piece.
I'm so excited about today's guest. We have Dr. Deanna Minich, PhD, MS, CNS, IFMCP. She is a nutrition scientist and functional medicine educator and author with over 25 years of experience. She is internationally recognized for her pioneering work on color-coded nutrition, or the rainbow diet, detoxification, circadian biology, and women's hormones. Dr. Minich has collaborated with leading figures in functional medicine, serves as Chief Scientific Officer at Symphony Natural Health, and is the recipient of the prestigious Linus and Ava Helen Pauling Award. Her work bridges science, spirituality, and creativity to promote whole self-healing. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's so nice to be in Austin with you.
I know. I'm so excited that you came in for this. What a treat.
Well, I see it as an adventure, and I really love the work that you do. And I thought, let's just go and have a heart-to-heart conversation, see where it goes.
I love that. Well, thank you. And right back at you. You had just asked me before we started recording, how did I learn about your work at first? And I told you I would tell you on the podcast. So here we go.
Oh, it's a surprise.
Nothing too wild. But so I mentioned to you before we came in that I had a medical clinic. So we were exclusively hiring practitioners from IFM certification. So the clinic, it was in Ohio. So we were right next to the Cleveland Clinic. So they have that great functional medicine department. And one of the second nurse practitioner that I hired was just obsessed with you. So if she knew that we were having this conversation right now,
wow.
Yeah, Sherry, if you're listening, then, I'm sitting down with one of your all-time favorites. She would reference you all the time. So
really? Oh, thanks, Sherry.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to see how we are all led to where we need to be and all the interconnections, right?
Totally.
In this health space. It's exciting.
Yeah. Well, you do a lot of work with IFM, right?
I do. I've been an educator with IFM since about 2009.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've been on their nutrition advisory board. I actually worked under Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who's the father of functional medicine.
I love him. He's been on the pod, and he has Big Bold Health now, right?
Yes,
and
he does. And Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute.
Yeah. And I think, does he have some involvement in function health, or I'm not too sure.
Well, he's very connected to Mark Hyman, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of like, they have that very unique father-son relationship, as I have a father-daughter relationship almost with Jeff. But he's connected to function, and then Mark is also connected to Big Bold Health. So they're all interwoven there. They do a lot of projects together.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to talk about at some point the Tartary buckwheat and see if you have any thoughts on that.
Okay.
So, obviously I've done nutrition podcasts, but I'm really excited to dive into the deepest levels of nutrition. I think it's an incredibly confusing subject for so many people. I think it's also very nuanced, right? So it's very bio-individual, I would assume. But the way that you articulate how nutrition is beneficial to the biology, I think is incredibly fascinating. So first, I would love to hear your backstory, what brought you to this type of studies and interests?
My mom.
Oh.
Well, you and I were talking about how we both grew up in the Midwest, and I grew up in the 1970s when it wasn't really cool to eat healthy. But I had one of those health nut moms that listened to Richard Simmons. She did his, TV exercise program. She was following somebody by the name of Adele Davis, who was one of the early nutrition pioneers. So I was one of those kids that went to school with brown bread sandwiches instead of white bread, like the kind of Wonder Bread that you could squish up into a
Yeah.
little ball.
How did that feel back then?
It was polarizing. It was very difficult for me because I just wanted to fit in with all the other kids and they weren't eating that food.
Yeah.
So I would come home crying. I was the oldest of three and I was crying and I said, I just want to eat like the other kids. And my mom would just shake her finger at me and said, the whiter the bread, the quicker you're dead.
Mm.
And I was like 8, so I didn't really care about
Oh my
that.
gosh.
But yeah, my mom was cutting edge. She still is.
Mm.
She's in her 70s, no medications, incredibly healthy, walks miles every day with her dog. So I would chalk everything up to mom. But then from there, I had a number of great other teachers.
Mm.
Like we mentioned, Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who I met later in life, but then, through grad school. And I never thought I would go and study nutrition because I was so polarized to it because I had this very strict upbringing around food and what I could eat. So I was a little bit of a rebel. I wanted to go to med school, actually. So I was pre-med, studied biology, but also studied literature. But then as I was working for all these different docs, I was thinking, this is not me.
Mm.
Whatever I do, I have to be like, I'm very all or nothing.
Yeah.
And I
Me
was
too.
feeling, I know.
Yeah, as you can see.
So we're definitely like-minded in that way. So I was feeling like, you know what, I can't do this. This is, I have to go all or nothing here. So I'm going to go to grad school. So I went the research route, which really served me well because I felt like, I was always asking questions, why? And science was able to do that for me. And if it couldn't do it for me in the way of a published study, then I could do it myself and research it. So I did a master's in science, and I did that at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where I grew up. So I wanted to stay close to home. And after I finished my master's thesis on carotenoids, which are plant pigments and oxidative stress, I went on to study essential fatty acid absorption and metabolism, and I did a PhD in medical science. After that, I went into believe it or not, I went into a large food industry. I didn't go into research. I didn't do the postdoc. I thought I need to now start putting all of this stuff into action. So I worked for a Fortune 100 company. I informed a lot of the marketing groups on science. And then I moved into the dietary supplement industry. I did that in about, it was the early 2000s. So like 2003, I joined a company called Metagenics, which is where I met Chef Bland.
I still love Metagenics. I take a lot of their products.
Yes, me too. Great quality, third-party validation and certification. So yeah, I mean, I grew up in the dietary supplement industry. I was a formulator very early on, product developer. Then I went on to work in the clinic. There was a clinic that was adjacent to the R&D facility. So I wasn't just a scientist. I mean, I worked with a scientist that actually did benchtop work, but I also did clinical work. So I'd run over to the clinic, see patients. We would do case reports, small clinical trials. And so I did that for a chunk. And all the while, I was very diversified. I was also starting to teach for the Institute for Functional Medicine. I started teaching for the University of Western States. I mean, at my heart, I am a researcher, but then also an educator. So I started to do a lot of that. And then currently, I'm Chief Science Officer at Symphony Natural Health, which super psyched about. Lots of goodness there. But I'm still doing a lot of diverse things. Because at the end of the day, I don't just want to do the research. I want to make those research findings applicable.
I love that. I'm going to ask you kind of, I don't know if this is a controversial question or not, but you've obviously been in functional medicine for so long. I feel like I'm seeing a bit of a shift because obviously I have an influx of people always asking, right? How do I find a doctor that can do similar medicine of what you're doing, like root cause? But I feel like as it's become more popular, we've gotten a little bit away from as significant of a root cause approach in functional medicine. And maybe there's a little bit of a feeling like you just look at the labs and then apply a supplement instead of a pharmaceutical into each area that needs to be optimized. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I love that question. Because I do think that many times what can happen within functional medicine or even integrative medicine is kind of that green pharmacy approach where we see labs and then we work to labs, but then we have so much other context, clinical context. So if we look at it now, and you mentioned function health, if we look at all the different biomarkers, But then we also have genetics.
Mhm.
We also have environment. You and I are really keen on all things total toxic load, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's important.
Super.
But then we also have, everything like nutrition and lifestyle and all of the overlay there. And then there's behavioral modification. So I think that this whole intertwining of genetics, age, lifespan, life cycle, hormones, there's a dynamic at play there. Like Jeff Bland would say, it's not homeostasis, it's homeodynamics. We're
Yeah.
constantly in flux. So, some practitioners, they don't even work with labs anymore because
Interesting.
they've been doing this for so long. So then they start to recognize like, oh, there's a pattern of symptoms. And this is what that person needs, especially with hormones.
Yeah.
But I think that the best approach is probably somewhere in the middle, where you bring in the labs, you bring in the symptoms, you bring in the genetics, you bring in all of the inputs that the person has. Like, what are they able to do? What do they want to do? Because I think that one of the things that is not focused on is the psychological aspects of behavior change, right?
Yeah. I would love for you to dive into that because I love, in your content, it's not just, hormone optimization. You have posts saying the spirituality of hormones, right? So there is this other dimension, to healing and to optimal health. And I think that conversation has gotten a bit missed with this new kind of wave of, it's not really new, but just now that people are seeing more functional medicine integrative docs, it's like, I wish it was all that like root cause, energetic, holistic, mixed with, of course, these important labs. But what brought you to this idea that it was like this spirituality component was incorporated? And then we'll definitely, for everyone listening, we'll be getting into nutrition deep soon.
Well, I just feel like you're hitting on all of my favorite cylinders here. I think being a scientist led me to spirituality. And the reason why is because when you're in a lab or you're doing a clinical trial, you start to observe things that are just phenomenal, like incredibly amazing in the way of like how the body works.
Yeah.
So then you start to think deeper, like how does the body have this intelligence? What is connecting all of us? Magnetic resonance, quantum biology. When you start to look at the future of medicine, I think we're going in the direction of light, sound, vibration, frequency. I was just on your PEMF.
Yeah.
To me, this is the future of medicine. Like, how do we bring in the subtle aspects, the fields, the forces? Like, what precedes the function? It's actually the field.
Yeah.
So how do we get into that before something takes residence in the body? Are the fields that surround us, electromagnetic fields. So I think what made me have a spiritual view, and we might even say, well, what is spirituality?
I was going to ask that next.
Yeah, because in functional medicine, there's a very clear-cut definition. And mental, emotional, spiritual belongs as part of the functional medicine matrix. Spirituality is defined as meaning, purpose, and connection. And that's how I see it. It does have that sense of purpose in life. I mean, there are even clinical studies looking at people who have purpose actually fare much better in terms of their lifespan, quality of life. And I feel that that is overlooked. So I'm really glad that you're looking at that because tracking back to hormones for a second, I do feel that so many people are just diving right into hormone therapy, but not looking at truly the breadth of the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual, like how menopause is like the next phase of life. It's transformative. There's something that's catapulting us into a different way of being, is how I see it.
There's a lot to unpack there. Well, I love that. And I think, as you put a very clear definition around spirituality, but I think it can look different for everybody. And I have found through this health optimization journey, and I've been doing this stuff for like over a decade. So I've been in this industry for a long time. I used to just feel like I was posting weird stuff in like my own corner of the internet, but now it's like longevity is a big thing. And we won't stay on this topic for too long, but my audience already knows, I believe in God. I'm a Christian. For me, that is my spirituality. But what I know without a doubt, like quantifiably on my data, is when I'm in prayer, when I'm in my reading of the Bible in the morning, my Oura ring is in restored, the most parasympathetic state you can be in. And there are devices that I can also get into that. Like if I go into HBOT as soon as it pressurizes, it can also get down. But HPOT is not very accessible. But prayer, or if you want to have that as meditation or just breath work or something, is really accessible, and I just have found it amazing when I started tracking that every single morning as I'm doing this practice, it's putting my body into this relaxed state, which, I've also found that although maybe the cortisol, the one-time biochemistry of men and women might be similar, we know that women experience and self-report much higher levels of stress. So I would love to get into that too. Like, why do we think that is? And I think stress for women, every woman that I know with like an Oura ring that's tracking their stress and then looking at their husbands like I do, like my husband has a lot more responsibility than I do, to be honest with you. But he's like relaxed all day long in his ring. Meanwhile, I'm just doing fun stuff and my stress is like, baseline higher. So I think starting with this conversation, and then we'll go into nutrition specifics of how can people maybe develop their own spiritual practice and how that is impacting the cells, like your biology. Because this is probably the hardest part, right? Because it's easier to check off supplement, check off workout, check off eating the right food. But this part, the stress and, internal feelings is so hard.
I call stress the big hairy monster toxin. So when I'm teaching on environmental health, many times people are expecting to hear about plastics and heavy metals. And what I bring into the conversation is stress. That stress can change how your body detoxifies. It can change the physiologic effects. I mean, just an acute bout of stress can lead to leaky gut.
Yeah.
So stress is a huge modifier. So the way that I see the male-female aspects of stress is that in women, we might see stress being sensitivity. And I do think that many women see their sensitivity as a double-edged sword, where it's like, oh, it's so hard to be so sensitive. I can't go out of my house. I can't go to a mall. I can't be out in public because I just take on everything, right? But then there's also this other side to sensitivity where it can be your greatest gift, the fact that you can walk into a room and get a sense and relate to people. To me, it's a relationship energy, how sensitive we can be. And I do think that we have those masculine and feminine, or yin and yang, or however we want it, sun and moon kind of aspects within us. So we can bring out, like, if we need boundaries or if we need more structure, more masculine principles, sometimes we need to pivot into that. Or more feminine, where we need more alone time. We need intuitive time, friend time, journaling time, dream time. So I also have worked with a number of spiritual teachers. I didn't mention that. That's not in my bio, but that's kind of like the underground of me. I grew up Catholic, so definitely a Christian upbringing. And the power of prayer is really significant. There are scientific studies on it. And I think for women and men alike, whatever brings us into that parasympathetic. And prayer is definitely something that I go to, as well as meditation, walking in nature. And one of the other things that I think is really important for women at all stages of life is to ensure that we are expressing our creativity. Many people tell me, oh, Deanna, I'm just not creative. And when I was going through a lot of reproductive issues, so I grew up with endometriosis. I had so much in the way of adhesions that I had a blocked fallopian tube on my left side.
Goodness.
So, and I was doing all the right things. I was doing nutrition and exercise, chiropractic, abdominal massage. I was doing energy work. I mean, I was doing it all, but something wasn't completely moving there. So, I just found myself on weekends starting to paint. And this was never anything that I went to go study. And so I would just buy these big rolls of paint. I started painting bright colors on the paper and then just hanging it up. Like, I had to look at it. I had to witness that color. And through all of that, long story short, I resolved the endometriosis, the blocked fallopian tube even. Everything cleared. And I remember when I had one of my scans after I did an art gallery showing of all of these crazy, chaotic, colorful paintings. And the gynecologist says to me, she said, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it because your uterus looks beautiful.
Wow.
And I started crying because I didn't know. I didn't know if it was the art that actually was the key that finally opened the door. But then I had all of the other support things that I was doing. So I can't say that art healed me, but I do feel that for women, back to your question about women being different than men in how they handle stress, this is where I think creativity comes in. And there are actually studies on expressive writing, journaling, drumming. I mean, whether it's sound that we are attracted to, for me, it's all things visual. I need to see color. I need to see like that enrichment of vibration or frequency, right? But for everybody, it's individualized, just like nutrition is.
Yeah. I mean, it's so important because I mean, I haven't even thought about this creativity aspect. Like I've always thought of myself as not an ultra creative person, more of like a data type person. But I want to try to incorporate some more creativity because we just know that the body heals all of the other things that we talk about, whether it's nutrition or whether it's lymphatic drainage or it's red light therapy or sauna or whatever. It's going to work so much better if you're in a relaxed state.
Yes.
But it's so hard to achieve that these days. I mean, social media, the ongoing blue light, the never ending like notifications and comparison. And it's just all the time, you know. I sometimes wish I could like go back to when people didn't have phones just to like, what did it feel like then? You know, were they more relaxed or did they just find something else to stress about?
Well, I'm from that generation without phones.
Okay, well, wonderful.
And I think it was different. Things weren't so rapid fire and quickly moving. You know, now everybody's on call.
Yeah,
Like back then, you know, you had the old fashioned rotary phones and like the wall phones, and your friends had to call you and you sat there and you talked to them and you were focused. Now it's like, oh, I'm multitasking. And I find myself doing it where I'm texting and I'm doing multiple things. So we're changing our brain chemistry and we're changing our hormonal rhythms as well. I want to go back to something that you said about artificial light because I feel like that has, in conjunction with the phone use and technology, it is definitely changing us. And in fact, I call artificial light at night the most societally accepted endocrine disruptor because most people don't think that light can be toxic. They know that metals and plastics and perfluorinated compounds and Teflon and all of that stuff is toxic, but they don't see ALAN as being toxic, artificial light at night.
Yeah.
But we know that it disturbs hormones. And the one hormone that's really pivotal at night, which I feel is connected to the feminine, is melatonin.
Interesting. Well, yes, on melatonin, but I've never heard of it being connected to the feminine. So, real quick before we jump into that. So, okay, what are some practical things that people can do? So, what time do you recommend shutting off the blue light? And then in general, are there ways? So, I'll tell you a few things that we've done. So, obviously, minus the podcast lighting. This is not healthy lighting for us, but it's necessary.
And during the day,
Yes.
right? We're not doing this at night.
Exactly, yes. So most of the time I try to do natural lighting in the house. So, you know, we can raise this up. But these lights overhead, I had them all moved to the warmest setting possible. So what else can people do to try to mitigate that? Because I don't think people understand that it's such a risk factor.
They don't.
Yeah.
You have to mirror your rhythms with nature. So when it gets dim outside is when it should be dim in the house.
Yeah.
During the summer, we have more light at night, and so we can extend ourselves a little bit more when it comes to light. We have a bigger grace period. But during the winter months, we just weren't biologically set up to have all of that blue light enrichment so late. So another thing that you can do if you live indoors a lot where it's like, okay, how do I structure my environment? One of the things that I have done since I have a home office is I work in front of a window. And if you have your phone, there is a Lux Meter app that you can use where if you have it at eye level, you can actually see what your lux reading is. Lux is a unit of light.
Yeah.
So 1 lux is equal to a candle flame about 1 meter or 3 feet away.
Okay.
So you want increased enrichment. So you need to measure it, right? So that you kind of know. So you can measure your environment during the day to kind of see where you're at. So at noontime, we're looking at probably anywhere between 8 to 15,000 lux.
Okay.
I was at the beach one day at noon, and I just brought my Lux meter out, and it was insane. It was like in the 20s. It was
Wow.
like, right? But most people, they have flip-flopped their routine where now they're indoors and they have less luminosity during the day and then more at night, which is just the opposite. The other thing that you can do inside, my husband is really into light and tech, is you can bring in the Philips Hue bulbs.
Mm-hmm.
So you can control that through an app.
Mm-hmm.
They are a little bit pricier, but you can change the color to a more warm hue, like an orange, red, pink hue. And I even, in my sauna, I have the color there, of course.
Yes, yes.
I try to bring in color wherever I go. So I have color in the sauna itself. You know, some people have infrared and they have the red light, which is good. But there are other hues that I do think can be important for our psychology and also our skin and our biology.
What are some of those colors that you like?
Green.
Green, okay.
Green. Green is good for heart rate variability.
Hmm.
Blue is good for skin. And if we look at even psoriasis, applications of certain colored lights in order to help with changing certain pathways. So blue would be good for inflammatory type skin conditions. Green, good for the heart. Red, exciting the skin tissue, right, to produce certain things. Exciting the melatonin, exciting the mitochondria. So, and I think we have to kind of move between all of those different spectra. I think sometimes we get really focused on red light therapy and it's all about, but I'm envisioning in the future, we've got rainbow light therapy. We've got different lights for different psychological frameworks. Let's go back to your question about the parasympathetic.
Yeah.
And you almost have to ask, like, how do you feel in certain colors? And in fact, you know, I feel like everybody has a favorite color. Children always know what their favorite color is.
Yeah.
And when I'm lecturing, I usually survey the audience, you know, what's your favorite color? And most people like green, blue, and purple.
Oh, interesting.
They do not resonate with the red, orange, and yellow as much.
Interesting.
It is interesting. I think because they're cooling colors, they are more parasympathetic. And if you put somebody into a light with blue light, like let's just say not the artificial light at night, but just like a blue cast light, it's kind of calming and relaxing. And you can see even on airlines, on flights, they'll put blue light.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be doing that at
I was always thinking, yeah, it was one of the things I'm like, why do airplanes do this? Because
I know.
you read at the
Exactly. Or
Very
just
nice.
like a warmer color.
You would think like with the investments and how much planes cost, they would maybe do a slightly better job at optimizing them in some point.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
So frustrating. Okay, yeah, that's super interesting. So during the day then ideally, so is the ideal situation natural light?
The ideal situation is natural light as much as possible. Windows, working in front of those windows would be important.
Do you want to be facing the window or the window is behind you?
You
Or
want to be
just-
facing the window.
Okay, I'm doing the opposite right now. Great. I have my desk right there, but the window is in the back.
In the back.
So you want it to
See how you feel when you turn it. Yeah, because wherever your eyes are, that's what you're seeing. So that would be, you'd have to test your Light Meter Lux app
Yeah.
to see what your luminosity would be. But I have noticed a difference. Like if I am working against a wall, my Lux is like 200 to 500. But if I'm working with a window in front of me and if it's daytime, I'm at about 5,000 Lux. Significant.
So I actually measure the light in all of the bedrooms that I have. I'll show you after the pod maybe. But then it breaks down the red, blue, green, and it gives you a score. And I haven't really understood the score completely yet because sometimes it'll say there's too much of a red or green. Is there a goal that we should be trying to aim for, let's say from the hours of waking up? So I wake up before the sun. I wake up naturally at like 5 o'clock. So I usually get sun first thing that I can. It rises here at 7 a.m. So my husband and I go on a little walk around our neighborhood, see the nature, see the horses, hear the roosters. Very nice.
It's really pretty here.
Yeah, thank you. But what should we be aiming for from light from like when we wake up and then when does it start to downregulate? By the way, the sun doesn't set here until very late also, probably because summer, but it's not even setting until like 7:30 and I go to bed at 8 o'clock. So I still try to like induce, I turn on orange light like after I'm done eating. So after 4, is that good or should I just be waiting for it to naturally set?
So you got to go with your body rhythm. If you start to get tired and that is what you prefer in terms of a sleep cycle, then to stick with that. And you might need supplemental melatonin to give your body an earlier circadian signal. So that's something to think about.
Yeah.
But in terms of the colors per the day, when you wake up, you want that blue light. So you don't want it at night, but you want it during the day, and especially early in the morning.
Yeah.
So that first 15 to 20 minutes of exposure of the retina of the eyes to that blue light, even if it's cloudy, you're still getting that.
Yeah.
And then full spectrum light by midday. And then as you go into the afternoon, moving more towards the warming spectra. So the red, the orange, the golden hues, the pinkish hues.
Yeah. Yeah, I also try. So our sun sets on this when we were buying houses. My husband's very into sun, like morning sun exposure, which I love. So we would think about where the sun was going to rise and set each day. So rises over here on this side and then sets in the backyard. So we're able to view that sunset, on most days in general. So I think that's probably beneficial as well, right?
Yeah, that is beneficial. And it's great that you had so much intention with the home,
Yeah.
because now you don't even have to think about it. You thought about it early on, and now it's like, okay, it's just part of your life, and you don't have to deliberately try to get it, because it will be part of your rhythm. That's why sometimes they say, too, to have your bedroom in the east, because that's where the sun is rising. So just naturally and energetically, that's a better location. And especially with the head facing east, just in terms of, again, having the window and having that connection to light.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Ours is not that way, but also it wouldn't matter so much because I'm up so early. So, you know what I should go back to doing that I used to do is I have this pair of glasses called retimer glasses. Have you ever heard of these?
No, I haven't heard of that brand.
It's great for like jet lag. So I will take them when I travel internationally, but I should start doing it here. So because I'm waking up like 2 hours prior to the sun, and it's like pitch black here until 7, and then it finally peaks out. But I should start putting those retimers. So it's blue-green light. It's like in the glasses. So that's what it's for, is like mimicking that natural sun. So I should probably start putting those on again in the morning.
Yeah, and see how you feel, because I don't think we know long term what happens with the use of like changing our eyes in that way, in the light that comes in. We would think that we're helping ourselves along.
Yeah.
And I would hope so. But it might be interesting just to observe, like get your metrics like you do.
Yeah.
Look at your scores and just kind of see, like, does that change my circadian biology?
Yeah.
Because I do think that I'm putting together a presentation right now on circadian biology, but looking at how we each have a circadian imprint. All of us are so different. Even our eye color can change with our circadian needs.
Interesting.
So you have deeper hued eyes, you have brown eyes, I have green eyes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be more sensitive to that light at night because my eyes are they have more pigment. The iris is going to be more sensitive to that bright light. So I'll have greater melatonin suppression than you will. But that doesn't mean you won't have no melatonin suppression.
Right. Yeah.
And then there's also skin color, and how that determines receptivity to light. And just even wearing a shirt with shorter sleeves versus longer sleeves, because we still get the penetrance of certain wavelength of light. So a lot of different things determine our chronobiology beyond just our circadian rhythm, even genetics. So there are clock genes. Then there's also the melatonin receptor gene, where for some people, they're going to be more sensitive to the light and dark rhythm, because melatonin is hanging on the receptor a little bit longer than it needs to be.
Interesting. So you are a believer then in these sleep chronotypes?
Yes, I think that there's something to those, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Because mine thinks that I should be going to bed later than I am going to bed, but I prefer to go to bed earlier. So do you think I'm like going against my natural, like my Whoop? So I just started wearing the Whoop. I've been wearing Oura Ring for like 7 years. My Whoop thinks that I should be going to bed at 11:58.
Oh my.
Way too late. I mean,
I think that's too late.
How do you even? So what are the chronotypes? It's like, is it a bear and a dolphin? I think I might be a dolphin.
There are different kinds, different archetypes, but in general, there's the morning person, then there's the evening person, then there's the neutral, the person in between.
Yeah.
And then there's the person that can flex depending on season. So I would say, go with your type and what you feel most balanced with.
Yeah.
Because, I actually stopped wearing my Aura ring because my Aura ring would tell me, oh, you had this disruption. And I'm thinking to myself, I actually felt like I slept really well. I feel refreshed.
Yeah.
So I often look at, our symptoms versus the metrics and how they truly measure up. Are they truly perfect? And I think that somewhere the truth is in between those two things, because are we deluding ourselves by thinking we slept well? And do we need that checks and balances of the data? And I think it's back to your question about root cause,
Right.
like how we have to go deeper and we have to go beyond the labs.
Yeah.
We really do need to look at our symptoms in a fuller spectrum way, an emotional, mental, cognitive, spiritual even way
Yeah.
in order to assess that better.
And how do you recommend people to start doing that? I mean, I've always, like, since I even started posting on social media, told people that they should journal their days, right? Because I think people have gotten we've normalized feeling so poor that they don't even realize it, right? So like they don't even realize they're dragging through the day or, feel terrible. But then also I feel like that pairs with this purpose, because I always say there's no way you're going to wake up every day and work out 5 days a week or eat healthy or whatever, because that's going a little bit against how we're naturally wired, right? Aren't we wired for the most pleasure with the least resistance? I mean, that's ideal. So in order to do this other thing, like being really healthy, doing these habits, you have to know why you're doing it. Because if you don't have a purpose, you're not going to stay on that trajectory for very long.
That's a really good point. Purpose defines everything, which is why when you look at motivational interviewing with a client, you often ask, why? Why do you want to be healthy? Well, I want to be healthy because of my kids or my family. So you constantly have to tether to their motivation.
Yes.
BJ Fogg's work, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Tiny Habits, he said that, motivation it wanes, it waxes and wanes. You can't always rely on that. So you need prompts in your environment. So much like you've done with your home, where you've set up your home in such a way that it will take care of itself as much as we can to do that. Back to your question about how do we inform ourselves emotionally, mentally, spiritually, I think we need two things. And one is we do need to somehow metricize it, like you're talking about journaling, which is great if people can do morning pages of just 3 pages, just writing out how you feel, just like letting that out. Some people like to meditate a little bit in the morning or pray or read devotional literature. I think that that's also really settling for the day. Because in my view, how you start the day informs the rest of the day. So that morning, whatever you're doing is so key. I do have something on my phone where it will ask me about my mood state. It'll say, let's reflect on how things are going for you.
Nice.
And it'll come up and you can kind of just quickly program how you feel. And that's a really nice checks and balances too, because many times when I'm working with people on food, I want to see it. Writing down that you had a salad doesn't mean anything. And I've learned that in clinical practice, because then I would say, oh, what they're really eating is an iceberg lettuce salad with cherry tomatoes with a lot of dressing. So that's not really the salad that I thought it would be.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have to look at how you feel. And I even created a food and mood tracker because the colors of your food track to the colors of your mood, I have found. And that's what the literature shows as well, that eating colorful fruits and vegetables and whole plant foods not only helps to reduce the risk of chronic disease, but it also helps to reduce psychological distress, enhances creativity, enhances curiosity, and even flourishing. Flourishing was the word that was used. And even to the extent of somebody going from unemployment to employment, like the jump in the psychological aspects was actually great just from eating all of those phytochemicals and fiber.
Wow. Can you give us an example of the color? And like, does it actually track that specifically? Like carrots, orange, track with a certain like level of energy?
So what I wrote about in the Rainbow Diet is that there's a color code. Every cluster of color within food tracks to a certain function. Not exclusively so, but generally so.
Got it.
So red foods would track to helping with healthy inflammatory response, just like the redness of inflammation.
Yeah.
Orange would track to endocrine health.
Can we name a few? Okay, red
Yeah.
foods. So like red bell peppers. I'll let you do it, but I'm just thinking of a few. So what are your favorite like red foods for reducing?
Pomegranate.
Yeah. Whole pomegranate juice, seeds.
Both.
Okay.
Definitely both. Pomegranate is great because of all of those polyphenols, especially. So when I think of red, I'm thinking of polyphenols. So polyphenol-rich foods would be whether strawberries, berries, cherries, like I mentioned, the pomegranate. Beets would also have certain actives that help with inflammation.
Yeah.
So whether it's the juice or the cooked beet, they're both very impactful for an inflammatory response. In fact, there was a study on that both were good for that. When I think of orange, I think of the carotenoids, so like beta-carotene, alpha-carotene, beta-cryptozanthin. So if you eat too many carrots, this happened to my mom back in the 70s, you can turn a little bit orange.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't see it as necessarily a bad thing unless you have a condition where your body cannot process that. And so then it starts to accumulate unnecessarily.
Yeah.
But it can give you kind of that deep glow and that hue and also be like an internal sunscreen. So carotenoids go into the fat parts of the body, like the brain, the skin. It helps with a lot of those fat-soluble nutrients. So I think of endocrine health, a lot of the fat-soluble hormones, actually. Yellow tracks with digestive health. Oh, let me give you some examples of orange.
Yeah.
So persimmons, tangerines, oranges. Whenever I travel, I bring something citrus because of the yellow-orange connection there.
Yeah.
But also carrots.
Yeah.
And one of the neat ways to bring in different colors is to bring in different colors of a variety. So purple carrots. They have yellow carrots, orange carrots. I don't know if you have those here in Texas, but in the Pacific Northwest, we get a lot of purple carrots. So,
Yeah. I've been struggling a little bit here with the produce in Texas, and the farmers market. So obviously I was coming from LA where like there were so many abundant,
Yeah.
fruits and vegetables, and the farmers markets were amazing. So I'm still working through how do I best optimize that, because a lot of the farmers markets here seem to be like overrun with packaged foods. So it's a little bit difficult, and it's something I'm thinking about a lot lately.
Yeah. Well, and diversifying will be key, right? So the color is important, the creativity, diversification of your foods. So shopping at different markets, and then also the rhythm of the foods. So what foods are in which season in the location that you're living in.
Yeah.
That's the clue, because if I'm telling you what's local in Seattle and what I can get, it just won't be potentially what you may need here in Texas, where you have an extension of your seasons. You have different seasons. You have different humidity. So all of those things play into food.
What is more important? So I'm trying to actually, Sarah Gottfried, when she was staying with me, she got to see all the way I prepare my meals and everything. And it's great because she recommended that I start incorporating 30 different plant species per week But I was explaining to her that it's very difficult because here in Texas, if I'm also trying to eat seasonally, apparently, and I'm not yet familiar with like what is produced seasonally, but I know that at the farmers markets and the local health food stores, there's not too many options. So what one is more important? Is it the eating local and seasonal, or is it getting the 35 different types of?
Aim for diversity, first and foremost. And other ways that you can get diversity, even in the absence of having diverse fruits and vegetables, is look to nuts and seeds.
Okay.
Look to spices. In fact, if you look at cultures of longevity, one of the things that they share in common is diverse spices. So get a spice blend. And, for example, I have a curry powder with 11 different spices in it.
Wow.
So that counts for diversity. So herbal teas, not just one herb, but having a combination of herbs that you like. So all of that counts. And that 30 number comes from the American Gut Project, which is a citizen science project, in which they showed that people that had 30 or more diverse plants per week fared better in short-chain fatty acid production than people that had less than 10. So, but I actually think more could be better. There's a researcher in the UK, his name is Dr. Miguel Toribio Mateus, and he published a paper some years ago talking about 50
50. Oh,
And I even, I did this within I have an online group, and I said, let's do this for 7 days. Let's see what we can all get. And I had a woman in the group that had 221 diverse plants in a week. She was a vegan. So for her, she was tabulating everything and it all counted. But think broadly in terms of like juices and broths and stir fries and sauces. Combinations of things have that synergistic potential. There was even an article that was published on synergistic foods, how it's not just one food in isolation, but it's how foods work together in combination, which is why that diversity is also so important because of the phytochemicals that they bring forward, but then also how the gut is receiving that. Like, it's just think of it like exercise for the gut. The more diversity you bring in, it's like you're giving your gut a jog. You're giving your microbiome enrichment. Your gut loves diversity.
Can we talk through some practical ways to start getting these? Because this is like very important to me personally right now. And I'm assuming other people might feel a little overwhelmed if you say you have to have 30. I mean, certainly 221. That would be an insane plant. But let's talk about like, okay, breakfast. I'll give you a few things that I've done this week that I'm trying to incorporate. So I added a chia seed pudding. So that chia seeds counts, right?
What did you have in the pudding exactly?
So I'm adding a little bit of coconut milk, and then I'm adding a little bit of cinnamon in there, a little bit of nutmeg, and then I'm adding just the chia seeds. But then on top of it, I'm putting some fruit when I actually eat it. So like a couple of raspberries, a couple of blackberries, and a couple of blueberries. And then throwing some pumpkin seeds on there. And then I've been putting Brazil nut as well.
So that's 10. I just counted up everything.
Okay, great.
That was 10.
Okay, good. Well, this
now, diversity means you can't have those things the next day.
Okay.
Or the next day.
How often? Is it 7 days you have to switch, and then on the next Monday I can go back to the chia seed pudding?
Well, ideally, yeah. Or you change up your chia seed recipe where maybe you still have the chia seed pudding or the combination, but now you bring in hemp seeds. You can bring in hemp. Do you know Zen basil seeds?
Yes, I have that.
You can bring in Zen basil. So instead, now you're displacing the chia for another seed blend. So that's going to give you a unique additive that you can now count. And it's important to track these. The other thing is, like, as an example, some people go to the store and they just buy a big bag of apples.
Yeah.
That just counts as one variety.
Yeah.
But if you spent a minute in the store to grab a red delicious, a golden delicious, a Fuji, a pink lady, now you have 4 different varieties that all count towards your diversity score.
This actually, my husband, he is like loves apples, and he does always have me get very different kinds of apples. Yeah. Okay, but I need to go back to the chia seed pudding thing. So, because for me, I'm such a systematized person, I need to figure out a way to put this into a system. So, okay, so I can't have that chia seed pudding again to 1 whole week.
Or you can still have the chia seed pudding, but you're going to bring in other seeds. You're going to diversify around the chia. So on Monday, you might have just the chia and the 10 different things that you described.
Okay.
But then the second day, you have less of the chia. Now you bring in hemp or some other gel forming like flaxseed, or maybe you bring in a different seed. So now you can add to your number. You bring in a different fruit source. You bring in a different, instead of pumpkin seeds, you might bring in a different kind of a nut. Maybe you have almond slivers on top instead of the pumpkin seeds. Or you have different berries. So you might have, maybe on one day you just do the raspberries, and then on the next day you're doing blueberries.
Okay.
On another day you're doing blackberries.
Okay.
So you can still have the same recipe, but just rotate within that recipe, and that's where your creativity comes in.
True. Yes.
So you're actually working neuronally on creativity while functionally you are getting more diversity in that actual food.
I mean, it's definitely going to require a lot of creativity, I feel, to get, because I'm just so used to having kind of like the same food all the time. And I know it's been an area that I've needed to work on. And now I'm like deciding that time is now, especially before we have kids, because I really want to be able to give my kids like an optimal microbiome, very different than when I had growing up. And I know I need to like master this skill. So, okay, breakfast, we kind of talked about that. Now let's talk about, well, this is like part 2 of my breakfast. So that is like my pre-workout right now. So before I train, I will have some food, and that's the form that I'm doing right now. Then breakfast, I normally have some sort of like eggs. So like 3 organic eggs, a handful of lettuce. I think the lettuce is a big opportunity for me because I keep buying the same exact lettuce blend.
Okay.
So then I'll have a fermented food, which I do switch. So I have like 5 or 6 different options: kimchi, beets, garlic, sauerkraut, a bunch of different things. So I do try to switch that. But how can I bring in more diversity to that meal? Sometimes I'll also have like salmon, like the raw or smoked salmon. So, but that's basically my breakfast, and then also sometimes a lot of lentils also. So,
Oh, that's nice.
That's kind of the
Okay, so here are some ideas for you. So with the eggs, you can bring in spices. You can bring in chopped onion. You can bring in chopped herbs.
Yeah.
Like whether it's oregano. I keep a living oregano plant on my windowsill to remind me just to pluck a couple of those leaves off.
Good idea.
To cut up and put fresh into my eggs. Rosemary is another one that I have on my windowsill. That would be another great one.
Yeah.
So doctor up your eggs and also bring in like the red bell pepper that you spoke about before. Get some of that red, get more color in that breakfast meal.
Yeah.
So you can dice up that with the onion, olives.
That's a nice.
That would be something to add as well. So then separate from that, then moving on to the lettuce. So with lettuce, mixed leaf lettuce would be great because you can actually get diversity within that one food.
Yeah.
So if you go to the store and you know the red-brown colored leaves of lettuce, that would be great for phytochemical content.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Because that kind of lettuce has different phytochemicals than a green lettuce. And also aim for the lettuce that grows with its leaves open rather than tight.
Okay.
Because the more that the sun has reach into those leaves, the more phytochemicals that are made. So when you buy your lettuce, depending on how you're buying it, I don't know if you just buy it like all cleaned and cut.
I do, yeah.
Then just buy the mixed leaf lettuce and diversify, like get arugula maybe 1 week and just exhaust that through the week.
Do we think switching it out once a week is adequate? Okay.
I mean, I feel like, do the best you can with what you have. And so if you can, usually in the rotation way of eating, we talk about diversifying every 3 to 4 days.
Okay.
So if you feel that, you know what, I don't want to waste food, I want to, use this up for the next 3 days, try to use that up and then, shop like a European. When I lived in Europe, I noticed that people would go to the grocery store like every other day. You'd ride your bike, the containers are smaller, they're not large bags of things. So you had many opportunities to diversify. So buying smaller containers can already prime you towards diversification. And then in terms of, so in your breakfast, you had the lentils, which is good. There are different kinds of lentils. You had the lox or the smoked salmon, which is a nice addition for some more protein. And then the fermented foods would definitely give you an opportunity for diversification, and you can rotate those, or you can even take a little bit from each one.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, another thing, do you ever do smoothies or?
I used to do smoothies. I kind of come and go with smoothies.
Okay.
But smoothies are a great delivery mechanism for all the things, right? So what are your favorite smoothie recipes?
I think about the formula of a smoothie. So having a protein base, and I do think it's important to rotate proteins. So coconut milk, flaxseed milk. I do organic soy. Soy works really well for my body. All different kinds of milks. And then bring in your protein powder. Bring in a healthy fat.
Yeah.
So I have a high lignin flaxseed oil that I like.
Nice.
So and it's in a glass jar that's darkened. Right? You don't want any like black plastic bottles, anything like that. We all know that. And then bring in fruit. I load it up with fiber. One of the things that I am really, I would say, fastidious about is rotating my fibers.
Okay.
Fiber is what encourages and nourishes the gut microbiome and helps in that diversity translation. So I'll do flaxseed meal. And usually I'll tell women, especially perimenopausal women, aim for 1 to 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed meal per day, if you can.
Yeah.
Because of those lignans, which work again as a phytoestrogen and just encourage a better gut microbiome, especially as we go through menopause, when we start to see the gut microbiome changing and looking more like a man's.
Interesting.
And we know that the gut microbiome is connected to aging in general.
Yeah.
So if we're tending to the gut, and that's why fiber and just fiber maxing that smoothie.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'll bring in, so in Oregon, there is this company that has these different berry powders, like blueberry powder, raspberry powder, black raspberry powder, and I will change those up. They are concentrated powders of berries.
Nice.
So even if I don't have the fresh berries or I don't have the frozen berries on hand, I'm putting in those berry powders. Sometimes I'll use pH quintessence, which is an alfalfa powder, and I'll open the capsule and I'll just put in more alfalfa, more greens.
Nice. I do eat a lot of sprouts too. I put sprouts on my breakfast and on my dinner.
That's perfect.
Yeah. And I do try to mix the type of sprouts. There's like some that are spicy, some that are like not spicy.
Like a radish alfalfa sprout.
Yeah. And then when I go to the farmer's market, which there is one with a good selection of sprouts, it's like either broccoli sprouts or alfalfa sprouts. And then I try to incorporate those.
So in conjunction with sprouts, think about microgreens. Microgreens are very nutritious and in some ways even more nutritious than sprouts.
Interesting.
Because that leaflet is now growing for 7 days and it's got a little bit more nutrition than that early immature sprout. I think they're good for different things. It's not like you just want one and not the other because you want diversification. One other hack for diversification is let's just take broccoli. If you buy a whole stalk of broccoli with the florets, diversity would also mean eating the stem and the floret. Right?
Okay.
So sometimes we dispose of plant parts, but that actually counts towards diversification because in the stem of a plant, you get more minerals. And then in the floret, you've got other kinds of phytochemicals like glucosinolates, which would be good for detoxification. And when people have problems meeting their phytonutrients and they have a gap, what I would say is then choose a phytonutrient-rich powder. And they have different ones on the market these days, like the reds, the purples, the greens. You know, you can always do those. I think that those are, you know, they're a nice gap closer, but they're not actually like the real thing. I would always prefer to use the food first. But the fiber is so important. And we're just learning. I mean, fiber's been around forever. It's nothing new, but we're still eating too little in the way of fiber.
What are most Americans consuming? Do you know?
11 to 15 grams per day.
And what do you recommend?
Double that.
Double. So,
and actually,
like
if you look ancestrally, we were even triple that.
Wow.
It's just now, you know, and if we ate more fiber, we'd be less hungry. We'd have better blood sugar. We'd have better insulin. We'd have better cortisol. We'd have better hormones. It's kind of like, you know, we can track everything back to fiber in some way, which is why it's so important, in my belief, to eat plants.
Well, you know what's interesting that you say if you look back at our ancestors, because I feel like this is the crux of the whole carnivore, like promotion, right? Like, oh, we weren't eating all of these plants, but you're clearly saying that we actually were.
Well, it depends where we're from because you have different populations in different parts of the world. So if you look at the Scandinavian, I have Scandinavian ancestry. So when I look at my ancestors up in the northern part of Sweden, they're eating lots of berries. I mean, I've actually visited them, so I can kind of see how they eat reindeer meat, but then also like small berries and leafy greens and, you know, eating from the land wherever they are. I think that humans have evolved and moved together with plants. Plants are 80% of the biomass on the planet, so they inform so much of our environment. And in fact, it's a really good thing that we have plants because they are scooping up a lot of these toxicants that we can't really process very adequately. Kayla, I think that sometimes what the message that is lost with plants is the preparation. It's not just demonizing plants. It's looking at how we prepare them, how we consume them, because in some ways, how we treat plants now from a preparation standpoint is a bit different than how we've done it in the past, where people are juicing kale, celery, smoothies, 12 to 16 ounces per day. This is not how we've done I would say, those plants over time.
Yeah.
We might have those in soups or stir fries or with heat. And together with Weston Petrosky, we wrote a review article looking at what is referred to as anti-nutrients. So we would think of those classically as lectins, oxalates, goitrogens, phytates, tannins. Some people would even call phytoestrogens part of that anti-nutrient category. But what we found from looking at all the research is that there isn't a lot of clinical data to suggest that those things are necessarily bad or offenders. It's all about the context of the food, how it's prepared, the quantity in which it's consumed, and with what else it's consumed. And I think that some of those things, like if we just look at oxalates, it may even signal that we have some deficiency or issue with the microbiome, where now our body is hyperabsorbing that oxalic acid. So I think we need to look big and broad. It's not just pointing the finger at the food. It's looking at the relationship that our bodies have with the food.
Interesting. Can you give anyone listening that's not familiar with some of those categories of foods like oxalates or lectins, what examples would be?
Sure. So lectins, we would think of raw legumes. That's the classic one. But who eats raw legumes? Usually we're cooking them. And when we cook them, we break down those lectins. And there has been some concern about lectins from an immune perspective, but not necessarily seeing clinical data to support that. So we may need, again, something in the gut, or maybe it's signaling that we have inflammation in the gut. But cooking legumes properly should solve that problem.
Okay.
Oxalates, we would find those in leafy greens like Swiss chard, and in certain cases like almonds. So again, soaking nuts and seeds when possible, and then also cooking those greens. Steaming them can even help to reduce some of the oxalates. And also making sure that we're mineral sufficient, because then we don't lose or we don't create an imbalance there. So, and studies have shown that when we're more calcium sufficient, we don't have as many issues with those oxalates. So perhaps there's a mineral balance issue to look at.
Interesting. So would you say that what percentage of your plants are you eating cooked versus raw?
Fruits, for the most part, I'm eating raw. Especially during the summer, I'm eating more fruits. And then vegetables, for the most part, the more fiber something has in that way, sometimes I like to cook it.
Okay.
And I go by color. So let's just take broccoli. When you're looking at broccoli, it looks pretty green. But then if you steam it for about 1 minute and 30 seconds, it turns bright green.
Yeah.
And that's actually when a lot of the different phytochemicals would be potentiated and ready for action. But if you overcook broccoli, what happens? It starts to lose its color. So we start to get degradation of nutrients. So go by color. Same thing with carrots. I think about cooking carrots and how they turn brighter. So when we lose color, like if we take, like one of my favorite foods is purple potatoes. They're lower in glycemic index. And so, but you don't want to overcook them because then the color starts to bleed out.
Yeah.
And you can see that. And some people like to even repurpose that water, if they're cooking them in water and steaming and boiling, they'll reuse that water in something else because that's actually anthocyanins. Those are phytochemicals in that water that's making that water blue-purple.
Yeah. I love that.
Lots of things to think about.
There's a lot of nuance.
Yeah, there are a lot of context for sure.
Yeah. So I want to go back to something that you said earlier, this that during perimenopause, I believe you said, the microbiome begins to shift to be more like a man's microbiome. What are the differences in the microbiome?
Yes. As a woman starts to go through perimenopause, her microbiome becomes less diverse. And I think that in part that might be because of the connection to declining estrogen. Although we know perimenopause is not just an estrogen decline, there are changes happening in the gut potentially that would preempt a lot of these other changes during perimenopause. So you have probably heard of the estrobolome.
Yes.
The estrobolome would refer to the gut microorganisms that are responsible for estrogen metabolism. So that starts to change in women as she's going through perimenopause and then ultimately menopause. So her ability to metabolize estrogen may be impacted, which is why we really do need to think about if a woman is taking exogenous hormones, we have to make sure that she can metabolize that estradiol effectively.
Yeah.
So, and I think what has happened with the whole menopause conversation, again, is just front-loading hormones. But really, we need to look at the synthesis of hormones in the body and optimizing that, and we can talk about that. The transport of hormones through healthy hydration. You focus a lot on hydration, which I love.
Yeah.
The activation at the cell level, then the metabolism and excretion. And that's, I think, what people forget about metabolism and excretion. They focus on the synthesis, and let's just give hormones into the body. Let's try to repair what we're losing. But sometimes the issue and the symptoms are actually coming from the metabolism, which ties directly into the gut microbiome.
So how could this be looked at through a better lens?
Well, let's go back to what you said about a functional medicine provider looking at the root cause. Somebody really needs to assess whether symptomatically and or in conjunction with functional labs, what's going on in the gut. Because some of those first changes with aging and with the decline of the endocrine system are actually being seen at the level of the gut.
Interesting.
So looking at parameters of the gut, looking at inflammatory markers in the gut, looking at the diversity of the gut microbiome, which can be done, and exploring that. There's also some work showing that seasonally, our gut microbiome changes its diversity. And men and women have slight differences in that.
Interesting. And what do we see there with men and women's differences?
So for it kind of varies, but essentially women are a little bit more prone to not having that same resilience with the gut microbiome.
Interesting.
And there might be a hormone connection there.
So going back, especially if any practitioners are listening to this, going back to looking at the gut and looking at the potential leaky gut or changes in the microbiome, what are a few things that if those were start to be observed, you could do about it through diet?
3 things. I call it the 3P approach. So one is looking at prebiotic fibers, which we've already talked about. But, from a food perspective, we're looking at whether it's dandelion leaves, greens, squashes. A lot of those prebiotic fibers are so nourishing because you have to feed the organisms.
Yeah.
And they do need a lot of those prebiotic fibers. The second thing is the probiotics. So what you're doing with your kimchi and fermented foods is great because you're getting those diverse microorganisms.
I also do goat yogurt. Do you like that one? How do you feel about goat yogurt?
You're getting some probiotics within that. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Sorry.
Yeah. No. And that's nice for people who are more sensitive to cow dairy, bringing in goat. I have found clinically that people are much more tolerant of goat products. And so goat cheeses, goat yogurts, things of that nature. And then the third P is polyphenols. So out of all of the phytochemicals, and there are thousands upon thousands of them, the largest category is polyphenols. And so we get those from herbs, spices, cocoa, berries, grapes, cherries, these kinds of fruits.
Does coffee have polyphenols also?
Coffee has some polyphenols, yeah. Chlorogenic acid, caffeic acid, which can help the liver with blood sugar balance. Do you drink coffee?
I drink about I would say 3/4 of a cup per day in the morning. And I do biodynamic coffee. So it's like even, better than the organic. But yeah, so I have about 3/4 of a cup per day.
I used to not drink coffee until my 40s. So I'm 54 now. But at the time, I could have been like 44 or so, between 44 to 45. I started reading a lot of the research on hepatology and liver enzymes and what happens with coffee and seeing that, I need to be drinking coffee because it's actually revving up certain enzymes related to detoxification to move things through.
Yeah.
But then I also would have to look after phase 2 detoxification, making sure I had enough protein to deliver on what the coffee actives were doing in the first phase of detoxification.
So is that why, and this is maybe a bit graphic, but so it's revving up these enzymes, you say? Is that why when people often drink coffee, they have to use the restroom?
In part, yes. Yeah. And it's kind of a 2-prong approach. It's revving up the system from more of an adrenaline perspective and the sympathetic nervous system, which is why if you're hyper-stressed and on sympathetic overdrive, it may not be good to do coffee. But the fact that you do it in the morning and you have 3/4 cup and it's a high-quality coffee. I drink Purity coffee, so they're really good with the growing, the ethics, all of
Yes,
these things.
I've seen that one. I've seen that one.
Yeah. So I think coffee can be used medicinally. And that information of bringing in that food can be coupled with genetics because some people
Oh, yeah.
quickly metabolize caffeine and then they have no issue. I'm one of those people. I could
Me too.
actually, you too?
Yeah.
So in the evening, I could have an espresso if I really wanted to, but I'm not going to do it. Yeah. I mean, because my body processes that caffeine quickly.
Yeah, I think that's that's a major hack right there, is just to figure out if you metabolize slow or quickly, because you can also just feel how, you have a cup of coffee. Is it like keeping you wired for forever, or is not? So my husband, he will not be able to drink coffee, later in the evening, because he'll just be up all night. So
Same with my husband.
clearly we just have
1 cup a day, and that's it. He's a slow metabolizer of caffeine.
Yeah.
And actually, just a fun fact on that, for people's, just back to melatonin, because I love melatonin.
Oh, yeah, we never circle. We got to go.
Yeah, there's so many things to talk about there. How you metabolize caffeine is how you metabolize, for the most part, melatonin.
Interesting.
So if you are a fast metabolizer of caffeine like you and I are, we need to take melatonin closer into bedtime because our body's going to process it quickly. Whereas my husband needs to take his melatonin 3 hours before bedtime because
3, really?
slow.
Well, maybe that's it for me and my husband, because right now we're taking, and I'm excited to dive into melatonin because I feel like we've kind of demonized melatonin a bit.
Yes.
But then I have a whole book on like the melatonin only, and I've read that, and then so I'm like,
By Russ Ryder?
Yes, and
I love that book.
I'm confused. I think there's a lot of confusion about the real facts of the matter. So let's get into it. But okay, this is really interesting because my husband and I both he takes it more often. So I have better sleep than he does. He takes a long time to fall asleep. I fall asleep, within 10 to 14 minutes, like every single night. But maybe then he needs to start taking the sleep supplement prior, like earlier.
Yes.
Your husband really takes it 3 hours prior?
We experimented with different times because he said he was waking up groggy when he would take melatonin. And I said, oh, it's just your body is taking longer to process it. So you've got to back up that circadian signal and you need to take it. He tried out different times, like 2 hours. But what seemed to be the secret sauce for him was 3 hours.
Wow. Okay,
Because
great.
he just needed more time to process it. So some people will have that issue.
That makes a lot of sense why I don't ever feel groggy when I take melatonin.
Right, because it's out of your body pretty quick, probably. You peak in melatonin just naturally from the pineal gland between 2 and 4 a.m. So if you give yourself that additional bump in supplementation, because as we get older, what happens is you go through melatonopause, where you start to lose the melatonin and it comes down. So you're not going to have quite that peak in the middle of the night, which you need to help with brain detoxification and so many other things, and even antioxidant defense enzymes. So we need to be sure we take it closer into bed, which is why I keep it close to my sink as I'm preparing and getting ready.
That's important. Okay, so what is the deal with melatonin? We've been told don't take it because then it suppresses your natural melatonin production. We've been told only take it while traveling. I've read a book on saying it's very beneficial for a variety of things. What is the truth here?
It's all about the dose and the format.
Okay.
And your kinetics. So I think that when we look at the science of melatonin, there are copious articles that have been published, thousands of articles to support the use of melatonin as a supplement for a variety of reasons. But predominantly when we think of melatonin, we're thinking about sleep. But sleep is actually the byproduct of melatonin working as a circadian signaler. Circadian in the way of, as it gets dim outside and our eyes start to perceive the dim light in the absence of blue light, hopefully, what ends up happening is that melatonin starts to rise, and that is bringing down our core body temperature and leading us into sleep and letting our body know from a clock perspective, first with the master clock and then sending the signal to the peripheral clocks, that we need to align to circadian rhythm. So when we buck that, because we're doing shift work or we're going to bed too late or we're bathing our eyes in artificial blue light, now we are like tanking our melatonin, and we need the melatonin for rejuvenation and repair at night. But what is happening here is that for some people, they're taking too much.
Real quick question before we talk about the dose. So does food also impact melatonin production? So if you're eating too late?
Yes.
That also.
Yes. In fact, I just did an Instagram story on that this morning, right before I came over.
Oh, I love
I have been getting the question about Deanna, can I take melatonin during the day? Because some people know about its antioxidant potential. Here's the thing to remember. Always follow nature. Your pineal gland does not make melatonin through the day.
Yeah.
Right? It's a nighttime sleep circadian signaler.
What time would you say, obviously, I guess it will be different for each person depending on when they go to bed. But let's say I go to bed at 8. When should my melatonin production start kicking up?
As it gets dim outside. So it's all in response to light.
So it's still not even going to be getting dim until like 7:30.
Exactly. So you might need to, again, to preempt and to bring out your melatonin signal a little bit more with a low dose supplement, like a 0.3 milligram.
Okay.
And I love herbatonin because herbatonin is a plant melatonin and it's made from alfalfa, chlorella, and rice. And it's in a complex from the plant. So it's the same melatonin in our body, but it has an amplified effect because it's within the matrix of the plant.
Interesting.
So there was a study that was published showing head-to-head with synthetic melatonin, which is 99% of the melatonins out there, compared with herbatonins, finding that herbatonin was up to 646% greater in its anti-inflammatory activity.
That's unbelievable.
I know. And up to 470% greater in free radical scavenging. In other words, it actually did better and had an amplified response compared to synthetic melatonin. And the thing that you and I would be thinking about is, well, if it's synthetic, how is it made? And if you look at a lot of the different patents around there in terms of how melatonin is made, typically the process starts with petrochemicals. Yes. And there are 2 articles published showing that synthetic melatonin can have up to 13 different contaminants.
Goodness.
So different phthalimide, tryptamine derivatives that could complicate the picture of melatonin and may be the reason why there could be side effects. But I think that the dose is important. 0.3 milligrams is what we start to lose with age. Going on up, as far as like almost a milligram. Some people have asked me about higher doses, but I think that when we override the physiologic signal and we get into the pharmacological signal, it can be a little bit too much. And then back to our husbands, they can't process that. So then that kind of runs into the next day. And now you have a phase delay. I think it's better to kind of go with the life stage, middle age, how we start to lose, and patch that gap with a natural supplement.
Yeah, I love that. I want to talk about light. So when we started this conversation, we talked about the blue light, right? But also sunlight. They're so interesting because in the longevity industry, there's so many conflicting opinions, right? We have people that are all for natural sunlight, getting so much sun, getting way too tan. But then we have people that are not getting any and only living under a sun umbrella and like covering their hands with the gloves and just covering So how I try to find the middle ground, right? It feels natural. It seems like common sense. But what do you do and what are the benefits of getting sun? And do we get enough of the benefits of sun if we're only going out with the low UV index, maybe like 3 or less? Or do we need some of the higher UV index at all?
It depends on your skin type.
Okay.
I have pretty fair skin. My hack for getting light is I'll go outside midday. And I live in a rural area, kind of like you. And so it's very secluded, but I will expose my back to the sun so that I'm not getting sensitive areas where I would burn and create fragility.
Yeah.
So if you looked at my back, it's pretty tan.
Oh.
My arms may not look tan, but my back is kind of brown. So I like to get light in different parts of the body. So I think that's important, but you have to be careful because if you go overboard with ultraviolet light, now you start to get DNA damage, right? So there's the Goldilocks principle, not too little, not too much, but I can't tell you exactly because everybody has a different skin type. So you have to manage that. And you also have to manage it seasonally when we have less of sun and wavelengths during the winter months, right?
Yeah.
So that's where bringing in some of the external lights might be useful.
Yeah. So would the optimal sun protocol though be once you figure out, and there's an app that I use too. There's one called D-Minder, I think.
Yes.
There's a few. But you can put in your skin type. I'm just guessing my skin type. I don't really know. What skin
The
type do you think?
Fitzpatrick type.
Yeah.
So one would be like me. You might be 2.
Okay.
Yeah, you might be
Okay.
right in the middle there.
Okay, nice. So once you figure out your skin type, I'm sure ChatGPT could help with this also. You could probably take a picture and then ask. It would
Probably,
tell you.
yeah.
So you figure that out and then you set like, because I also am trying to get X amount of vitamin D from the sun without getting too much. It's very complicated over here. But would you say that the morning sun, obviously for circadian rhythm, then maybe a peak of midday sun on not the face and, maybe the back.
Yeah.
And then viewing evening sunlight. That could be like the optimal
I like that a
sun
lot.
protocol.
Yeah. And you mentioned vitamin D. I just want to bring up another point that not many people are aware about, and that is that we have a photo-metabolome, meaning that our skin creates other photo products beyond vitamin D. And some of those have been identified in the literature by Dr. Sleminsky and others, showing that even though it may not be the vitamin D that we all know, we have lumisterol, tacosterol, we have all of these other little sterols. We have nitric oxide that forms in the skin. We have melatonin and melatonin metabolites that form in the skin. And much of those are used locally for anti-inflammatory response and effect, and also helping with the vasodilation, the circulation. And what's really interesting about the skin is that the skin is an endocrine organ. It even has its own HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. It responds to stress, which is why when people are stressed, sometimes they lose hair because the follicles are, being, all of this cortisol and having the stress response. So that's why sometimes stress shows up in our skin. So the light that you're speaking about is so key, not just for vitamin D, because in nutrition, I think what has happened is we focus so much on a single nutrient, but it's really like the array of different nutrients. It's not just vitamin B6. Vitamin B6 has many different vitamins. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that as it related to sun exposure, because you're not just getting vitamin D, but you don't find these photo-metabolites in a dietary supplement.
This is the question I was going to ask you next.
Let's put it out there. Somebody create that.
Right, yeah. Yeah, because
sun in a pill.
Well, exactly. Because I just made a post actually yesterday that having low levels of vitamin D is associated with potential increased risk for depression, for things like autoimmune condition. But then it's like you're not getting the full benefits if you're just supplementing, right? Because you're not getting all these other benefits.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's literature to support that. Dr. Hollick and others, Dr. Sleminsky, they've done elegant research on, again, these photo-metabolites. There are many of them. Like we're not just talking 1 or 2. There's just like the spray of metabolites that form when the sun is hitting our skin.
Yeah.
So I think, even if it's a small patch, and keep in mind that the UV and other wavelengths can go through clothing too. So wearing, just thinner clothing, you can do that in Texas.
Yeah.
I live in a pretty cloudy area, but you still get the penetration of certain wavelengths.
Yeah. The sun index is so high here that I only can go out for a quick bit during the midday.
Right.
It's like 12. It's insane. So, well, interesting. I just love this conversation. What about foods for, detox is a big thing in my opinion. Like, obviously, because I'm obsessed with the data around total toxic burden. And I know habits that I have that keep the toxic burden really low. Like for me, infrared sauna on pretty much a daily basis. Of course, you want to have like minerals and electrolytes and all that to support it. But that's when I see the lowest total tox burden. That's obviously I've already optimized the home environment. So we'll put that aside. The air quality, I measure every single room air quality. Like I can tell you that what the VOCs in this room is right now, because I look at it on my phone every day. But I also think we're living in a more toxic world than ever. So traveling and flights and the places that, you and I have to go. But we know that food can be a big part of that. So what are some of your favorite foods for detoxification?
Colorful foods that we talked about. So bringing in as much as possible those stinky sulfur-containing veggies like broccoli, would be good. When I think of travel, if we just talk about foods for travel, when we might be more prone to toxic load, I would say bringing teas with you, like green tea, because green tea will help with giving you the polyphenols to help with establishing more of that chronobiotic effect in the gut, and also just helps with detoxification pathways. Protein will be key.
Yeah.
Protein is part of detoxification, as we know, but just taking protein in is one thing. We have to be sure that we're digesting it properly. And this starts to falter with age, where now we start to have achlorhydria, we have less stomach acid, less protease. And so, with travel, sometimes we have stress and this, so then we're eating protein, but we're not actually digesting it. That's really important for detoxification.
What's your recommendation there for better detox? Did you take like enzymes?
Yes, I bring more when I travel. Yeah, I have my supplement bag with me. So it's like, I definitely bring more vitamin C, more antioxidants, NAD, B vitamins, fish oil.
Yeah.
Fish oil is great. Omega-3s, just even to start there, even with detoxification, because omega-3s inform the cell and the cell membrane. That was part of, again, my doctoral work.
Yeah.
And 85% of the global population is still deficient in omega-3s, which means that we're moving more in that inflammatory direction.
What is deficient classified as? Because I know what I keep my omega index at. I'm curious what you keep yours, but what classifies you as being deficient?
Anything less than 8% for EPA and DHA.
Interesting. Okay, good. Well, I'm glad that's higher than I would have expected, because most of these ranges, you can be like dead blast and still be within range,
That's true. The omega-3 index from Omega Quant, they do talk about 8% tracking with a lot of the research on cardiovascular markers.
Yeah.
But most Americans are between 4 and 5%, even when some of them are supplementing, is what I have seen clinically. Now, when women go through menopause, let's just go back to that again, because 75% of women have menopausal symptoms. And many times I do think there is that shift with inflammatory balance and antioxidant response. They're going to need more because now they have less estradiol and more inflammation. We now start to look at omega-3 balance. So it's been estimated that we need a little bit more when we are menopausal. So I just had my levels done in July, just 2 months ago, and they were 12%.
Okay, I was going to ask, because I keep mine at 11. So
Okay,
I'm curious. What's the upper limit?
Well, if you go too far, then, your blood is, you're very watery and flowy. And if you had surgery, that could be a problem, because now you could have excessive bleeding. And so if you have any kind of medical procedure, check in with your doc about the level of omega-3s. And you may need to even stop supplementation if your levels are a little bit higher. But I do think that there are certain times of life where we need more because our body is more out of balance or more prone to being out of balance. So I've been 12% for some time. I do a pretty modest amount, but I do it consistently. I do 2 grams of EPA and DHA per day. And that, for some reason, seems to work for me in terms of giving me consistently over the years that 12% level.
Nice. Would you not want to go, like, what would be what you
Too
would
high?
personally be comfortable with?
I don't think I've ever seen anything higher clinically. But you want a balance of fatty acids too. You don't want to stack the deck only in favor of all of those omega-3s. You do need a balance. I know that we malign the omega-6s and we're like putting them off there, but you actually need a bit of a balance. So I would say not going beyond 15%. Because that percentage that I'm referring to is actually EPA and DHA, right? So we're not looking at all the little other omega-3s. We're just looking at EPA and DHA. So, there are 64 measured fatty acids typically. So when we do that Omega Quant test, typically they're looking at the breadth of those and then establishing a percentage. So keeping it, I think between 12 to 15% would be definitely the upper limit. In fact, I think when I did Function Health, they even said I was, they see that as like
Too
high. I think that, again, I am postmenopausal. So I feel like having a bit more in the way of omega-3s is better for me. It affects cellular health. It affects your hydration, the transport. just even receptor activity within the cell membrane. So to me, omega-3s are so important for so many things. Like there is no other nutrient I can think of where it's almost like, we have a shortage, and the dietary omega-3s that we have that can be toxic. So we almost have to stack the deck, and we have to be even more deliberate in getting omega-3s as a supplement. I don't know if I think you saw it on my Instagram. I posted a study that was just published showing that women, now this was an observational study, meaning that they didn't set out to study this, but they found that women that supplemented with omega-3s, antioxidants, and B vitamins actually tended to have a later menopausal onset.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So I think in general, the more nutritionally replete that we can be, the better our outcomes can be for all kinds of things. And, if we think of menopause I would say it's a decline of the endocrine system overall. It's a natural process, but for some women, they're going to go through it earlier than others. And that can be because of age, diet, genetics, environment, toxic load. They may not supplement, and they may have nutrient gaps. So a woman might go through menopause at 42 instead of 52, which is the average.
Yeah.
So I do think we have to think about how do we optimize the endocrine circuit, because it's not just the ovaries. It is the hypothalamus pituitary, master gland signalers, the pineal, as well as the thyroid. Even the heart is part of it. The gut is part of the endocrine system. The liver is now part of the endocrine system. The adrenals and the ovaries. So I do think that priming the endocrine system as much as possible, because to me, this is the inner intelligence of the body.
Yeah.
Endocrine is everything. It is how we communicate. In functional medicine, we have the node of communication in which we put neurotransmitters and hormones, which kind of work together as like brother and sister. So if we can optimize the endocrine system, we'd want to do that through protein, through fat, and maybe this is where we get into some of the nutrition aspects. The macronutrients are so important as the foundation, and then bringing in the micronutrients, the certain vitamins and minerals to replete and bring all of those metabolic cycles, whether we're looking at synthesis or metabolism or excretion, into balance, and also the phytochemicals. We need to be thinking on all three tracks: macro, micro, phyto.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive into that. But I have one quick question real quick before we move on from omegas.
Sure.
So there's a supplement that's very popular now called Fatty 15. Have you heard of this? And it's C15, which, I've, based on the light understanding I have, we're a little bit more deficient in it than we used to be because people are not drinking milk as often. Do you think that this is something that we should also be supplementing or measuring?
I would look at the breadth of research there, which really does look at omega-3 and omega-6 as the classic essential fatty acids.
Okay.
I've looked a little bit at the C15 data. There's some things there, but it's not convincing enough for me to say I need to take a supplement. I'm more concerned with the breadth of research, which has all been around omega-3s, omega-6s, and making sure that I have those. Because they are involved in prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and inflammation.
Yeah.
Lots of different signalers.
Okay. Love that. Thank you. When we're talking about the endocrine system.
Yes.
And we're also looking at, so we kind of talked about a little bit of micronutrients, antioxidants, things of that nature. What are you aiming for, personally, or how can women that are listening to this identify their protein intake? Because this is another very controversial topic. We have people saying that, you should be getting 2 grams per pound of body weight. We have people saying, they're getting 0.6. I mean, what is your belief?
Much depends on your activity level, but let's just say like a general benchmark. And Dr. Stacy Sims and other people talk about this as well. But I do think that having between 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight would be a nice baseline to look at. And we may not even say that that's high. Maybe that's just foundational. And then whatever somebody needs over and beyond that, if they're engaging in strength training, if they have osteoporosis, they need to be very dialed in on their protein levels. Yeah. So I do think having protein in every meal. But again, I think that the message that's being lost is that we may not be digesting that protein properly. I can't tell you how many people talk with me about just feeling bloated, just feeling big and bloated. And already they're very conscious of their belly fat and, just their body composition, but they don't feel right in their bodies because they're bloated. And I'll often ask them, when do you feel bloated? And if they tell me it's 60 to 75 minutes after a protein-containing meal, I'm thinking, okay, we just need to ensure that your stomach acid is adequate. And so many times that can be problematic. So it's not just getting the protein. It's making sure that we're digesting it, which is what we talked about before. And I think that there is kind of, again, this Goldilocks curve. We don't want too much. Where now we've got too much protein, we're overwhelmed, we're not digesting it, and now we're just getting these breakdown products in the gut.
Yeah. So for someone that is feeling like bloated, they're not breaking down protein. We talked about enzymes, but from a stomach acid perspective, my original thoughts would be like a biotin or a HCl or something of that nature.
Yeah.
But would you use that as a bridge to get to how can you fix that stress reduction?
You're right, because the root cause, we need to look at why. So a couple of different things there before you get to betaine HCl, which would be like my last stop on that train.
Okay.
I wouldn't go there right away because that's just straight on hydrochloric acid. And so not everybody's going to fare very well. So I love what you said about, is it stress? How are you eating? When are you eating? How much are you eating? Are you inundating your body? What I have found has worked to some extent is what I call mono meals, which is going to sound like the antithesis of what I said about diversification, right? Because sometimes we have to go very simple with food and explore how we're responding.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to cook the food a little bit more. That can also help in breaking down the food. Maybe we need to go a little bit more elemental with a protein powder just to reestablish, making sure we're getting in the protein, but it's broken down in a form that our body can assimilate. I think that that's something to consider. Yes, so the stress response, absolutely. And then, some people ask me about food combining. Like, is there anything to that? Like if I have protein and a starch in a meal, typically, no, it really should not be a factor because we eat very mixed diets and meals. We want that.
Yeah.
Our gut likes that. But for some people with impaired digestion, they may not be able to tolerate that for a bit. So I have worked with people, especially women with autoimmune diseases. I have found that they seem to have an issue with, again, kind of like the digestive aspects. They need to really parse out some of their foods to see how they respond. Then separate from that, once we've observed how they're eating, what they're eating, the stress level and all of that, then I like to bring in bitters.
Okay.
So bitters would be things like arugula, dandelion, bitter tea, chicory root. There are also bitters that we can take supplementally, like berberine, because what we ideally want to do is stimulate the parietal cells in the stomach to produce our own endogenous acid.
Yeah.
We don't want to have to give acid because, that can be, some people can do that and have untoward effects where it's too acidic and now they have reflux or they have some other issue.
I think, is this true that if you make your own food, so the process of cooking and smelling the food can also be beneficial for raising? Okay.
Yes. I mean, eating starts before we've taken a bite. So when we start smelling the food, the olfactory response is part of the eating response. So I really like that you said that because it's the full context of the meal and sitting down, taking your time. Many people, what are they doing? They're multitasking while they're eating or they're scrolling on their phone while they're having their meal. And it's like, whoa, there's just no energy now for digestion. My husband is a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, so he does acupuncture.
Amazing.
So in the TCM system, they talk about digestion being connected to mental processing. So if we're busy thinking, we don't have enough chi or ki, in that system of healing to digest.
Yeah.
Right? So like overthinking, over worrying, and then we try to start to eat, but then we have stress in the gut and we can't move it on through.
Yeah.
So I do think I like what you're saying about, we need to look at all the aspects of eating. It's not just what we're eating, but how, when, why, how much.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we're just overloading the system.
Yeah. I mean, I also think breath work prior to consuming the meal, just to try to shift into that. Or, for me and my husband, for example, we pray before every meal. So that gives us a second to break. One thing I need to work on is eating my food slower. because I've just been working so many hours and I would like kind of cram it in any time, I'm breaking some of those older habits, that I have. My husband is amazing at this. He says he likes to dine. So this man takes the longest time ever to eat. And I love that for him. Like he chews his food so slow and his enzymes are great without ever taking an enzyme. So
there's something to that. I have a friend, she would always be the one that took the longest to finish the meal. And we kind of like have fun with her and make some jokes like, oh, well, she's taking so long again. But, actually she's like one of the healthiest people because she just goes so slow and takes their time.
Yeah.
When I have my lunch at home, if I'm working at my home office, one of the things I'll do is I'll go and eat outside. I'll eat on the deck, and that's when I do my back tanning while I'm eating, and because the sun is relaxing and nice and warm.
Yeah.
And so it just naturally creates that physiologic response of relaxation.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I really love that. Oh, you know what I was going to ask? So I do a micronutrient test 4 times a year. And of course, everybody that's listening already knows what I do is not what I'm recommending other people do. I'm doing it because I like the data and because I want to like try to refine everything like impeccably, which is not necessary. But how do you recommend? I've also suggested like if you can't get a micronutrient test or you don't want to, there's like apps like Chronometer or something that I say you can plug in and, you can get your micronutrients, a rough estimate. How do you think people should estimate these micronutrient levels?
It's challenging because we're always fluxing with those levels. Even a menstruating woman has different levels on day 1 of her cycle compared to day 14 or compared to day 19. So it's really difficult to gauge deficiencies or insufficiencies. So here's where something like testing might be something to invest in. And there are, even if it's once a year, just to get a gauge on supplementation. Am I doing too little or too much? Because even though micronutrients are in short supply in foods because many soils are becoming more toxic and less nutrient rich, we can also have toxicity because of the supplements that we might be taking. Case in point would be selenium. Selenium is much needed. We see it as an important mineral. We need it for thyroid hormone, but if we have too high of selenium, there are some studies that show that may not be such a good thing. So I think the heavy hitters where you could see toxicity, I usually think of iron and zinc and sometimes selenium if people are taking supplements that would involve that.
Yeah. And something to consider, because I just experienced this on my last micronutrient test, is you have to look at the collective of all the supplements you're taking, right? Because so for me, my copper to zinc ratio is a little bit off right now. My serum levels are fine. I'm not getting anywhere near toxic, but my cellular and serum levels are both within normal ranges for both the copper and the zinc. But the ratio is a bit off, not optimal, because, I went back and I looked through. I'm like, oh, well, I was taking, thyroid synergy and I was taking this prenatal vitamin, and then they both had the zinc in it. And then, I'm also on a gut protocol, and then I have the GI Revive, which had a little bit of zinc, so too much. But so really just thinking about all the different supplements you're taking, because I test so much, there's not really a lot of room to get into a really bad area. But let's say I only tested once every other year and I was just on that supplement stack. My supplements change, sometimes once a month, but definitely at least once a quarter. So really important to just look at the totality of everything that you're taking.
It is. And also within functional medicine, we talk about the nutrition physical exam, which is more primed towards looking at deficiencies of nutrients. So typically if we think of a B vitamin insufficiency or deficiency, we think of cracked lips or changes in the tongue, or if there are changes in omega-3 status, we look at changes to hair, skin, and nails. Usually we look at with dietary protein and minerals, we think of nails and nail strength. This is why I don't paint my nails, because it's like I always want to get a gauge on like, okay, how's my calcium intake? It's like an indirect measure. So sometimes we just have to look at ourselves to kind of get a sense of like, okay, I've got this eczema patch that won't heal, or I've got this redness and swelling that doesn't seem to subside.
Oh, that's interesting. So paying attention to maybe, physical attributes or changes in terms of nutrition. And can you also just define for the audience what a deficiency versus an insufficiency would be?
Deficiency would be within a certain laboratory range where you don't have enough to meet your needs functionally.
Yeah.
Insufficiency is heading towards deficiency, but not quite there. So you may have less than optimal amounts that you might need. So you could be falling short. Maybe your body can compensate, but it's having to do so in such a way to take from other places, which may not be good long term.
Yeah.
And insufficiency can be dealt with short term, but long term, you start to run into problems.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm always looking to keep my nutrients as much in those optimal ranges as possible.
That's really important. Yeah. And eventually, I think we'll get into phytonutrient testing. I don't feel like we're absolutely there, but we have indirect measures of phytonutrients. We have things like oxidative stress, where you can look in the urine to look at oxidized metabolites, things of that nature. So sometimes, nothing is ever perfect with testing. We're just getting a little bit of a window into a body compartment. So we do our best.
Yeah, I like this, the oxidative stress profile from Vibrant. I just did that one for the first time. So
Nice.
I think I'll keep that in my repertoire for a little bit,
I think oxidative stress is something to focus on because it's so connected to cellular health, aging, and DNA damage.
Yeah.
So
super
to
important.
really stay on the pulse of that is a really good idea. Yeah.
I love that. Well, I feel like this conversation, we've really got to cover a lot. Is there anything else that you really want to cover or that you feel like we haven't spoken about that we feel like people should know?
We talked about nutrition because I feel like the foundational aspect of nutrition and lifestyle is really important to cover, right? And many women are already in tune with that.
Yeah.
When we're thinking of supplements, I do want to mention feminescence.
Okay, I've heard of this. Yeah.
Have you heard of feminescence?
Yeah, tell me more about it.
I work with Symphony Natural Health, and feminescence is the first natural product that has shown to statistically significantly impact hormones.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting, right? So when I think about a woman going through perimenopause, ideally what we want to do is optimize her endocrine circuit. So again, addressing the diet, the different aspects of lifestyle, but then also bringing in feminescence, because she may need less of hormones later on. The way that feminescence works is it helps to nourish the hypothalamic, pituitary, thyroid, adrenal, ovarian axis. And in the 4 published clinical trials in peri and postmenopausal women, we see bumps in estradiol. And within the level of estradiol that would be appropriate for that stage of life.
Oh,
Which
interesting.
actually nicely coincides with some of the levels of estradiol that we are now know to need for helping with bone health. So up in the 60s, right? So what I think is the proper sequence to focus on with menopause is diet, nutrition, first and foremost, and getting at lifestyle as much as we can. We talked a lot about stress today.
Yeah.
I think that stress primes your adrenal hormones, which can change your sex steroids. And then moving on with feminescence to help prime the endocrine circuit within.
And about when you feel like you're entering perimenopause.
Yes. When you are, so there are 3 life stage products related to feminescence.
Okay.
One is Feminescence Maca Harmony, which is more for menstruating women to help them with hormone balance. Then we have Feminescence Maca Life, which is all about the perimenopausal stage of life. So helping women with the perimenopausal symptoms and how important that is. So really helping her to navigate that space because, we don't want to necessarily enter in exogenous hormones then because her body's too dynamic and fluxing. I think it's better to focus on the health of the endocrine system and get that communication streamlined. Now, ready for menopause. And then she moves into postmenopause where now she's going to need brain, bone, and overall support, whether for skin and all of her other organs. And so what we see there is, yes, a focus potentially on symptoms, but on the longer sustainable aspects of her health. And that is Feminescence Maca Pause. So I'm actually on Feminescence Maca Pause. I do 2 capsules twice a day. And again, it's a natural product just to prime and nourish my entire endocrine circuit. And then I bring in small amounts of hormone therapy.
Okay. Well, I love that. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think when I get to that life stage, I will definitely be exploring, bioidentical hormone therapy. But I think supporting the underlying symptoms instead of only just replacing, I think makes a lot of sense to me. So
Yeah, we have to, because I think hormone therapy doesn't solve every woman's woes.
mm,
So we have to look bigger and broader at the whole, like our adrenals. Are we really healthy in our stress response and our thyroid health? Because what I have seen with women is slowly and surely her endocrine system gets kind of just gets chiseled away.
yeah.
So, adrenals, overwork, overstress, lack of self-care. And then in her early 40s, many times what I see is autoimmune thyroid conditions.
Mm,
So now we're getting at like two of the biggest endocrine aspects.
yeah.
Her gut health is changing. What she can eat at 40 is not what she could eat at 20.
Mm,
So the gut is highly endocrine. And then eventually, her ovaries start to go into decline and she goes into early perimenopause. So I feel like the more that we can back it up like you're doing, you're optimizing your fertility and your body for new life, and so that you feel good, right?
Yeah.
That's really what we want for everybody. So the sooner that we can think about that, and preferably preconception,
yeah.
as you're doing, that's really optimal. So that's congratulations to you for
Well,
even
thank you.
thinking in that way.
Of course. Well, thank you so much. And we'll definitely include links too. You can send me the links that you would prefer to us to include for Feminescence. But that sounds super exciting. And I really am happy that, they have a voice like yours associated, for what seemingly is very beneficial to women. So I love that.
Yeah. Especially, I couldn't back up anything that didn't have science behind it.
Yeah.
And also experiential, just, using it myself. So it's easy to talk about. I'm definitely an advocate for that reason. And I want to help women.
Yeah.
Back in my teenage years, when I started to have all of these issues with my reproductive system and the endometriosis that I talked about with my creativity, I kind of have as my mission at that point, I need to do something to help other women.
Mm.
I wasn't sure what that was. I was thinking, do I help them with art? Do I help them with creativity? I feel that really it's a full spectrum approach of nutrition, lifestyle, creativity,
Yeah.
and really realizing their full potential spiritually.
Yeah.
So
I love that. I mean, I think
now.
I think you and I have a lot of crossover. Obviously everything that I'm doing is also to hopefully benefit women and have
Yes.
like a deeper glimpse into possibilities of what we can do, what I'm doing, just, because a lot of the figures in the world of longevity are male. So I'm excited that we both have that common.
That's why I wanted to come and talk with you. I felt that you were really special in that way as a woman's voice in longevity and
Thank you.
looking at optimal aging. We need that.
Yeah.
And women are very unique,
Yeah.
right? We have different unique needs, and you're exploring that. And, I think it's good. We need more of you.
Well, thank you. I mean, yeah, I agree. We need, we're 50% of the population, but we're just like so underserved. So it's like, we need to explore things on our own. I need to be having conversations with people like you and women on my podcast to, just feature all the voices that we possibly can to like dig down and figure out like, what do we actually do here?
Yeah.
Because it's complicated and there's nuance I have found in every area of health optimization, but certainly, there's zero reason for a male biohacker to think about, ovarian aging or fertility. I guess now they're thinking about fertility a little bit more, male fertility, but there's they're not thinking about perimenopause. They're not thinking about hormone shifts. They're not thinking about changing anything about their schedule or their routines or whatever it may be, because they're just not experiencing these things. So it makes all the sense, but we need more of this. So
We do. We have to complement what is known about men's health.
yeah.
So keep up the great work.
Well, thank
Great to
you.
meet with you.
And thank you so much for joining me today. And where can people find you?
Well, they can find me on my website, deannaminich.com. They can also find more about the Feminescence product and also the Herbatonin that I talked about on symphonynaturalhealth.com.
Amazing.
And, you and I are on Instagram and Facebook. So, all of those links are there.
It's been such a pleasure to have a chat with you. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Of course.